The basic narrative of human struggle is oppressor versus oppressed. We use category structures to constrain that infinite number of interpretations. Because the basic narrative is oppressor versus oppressed, we choose those narratives that serve our function as oppressors. So it's deeply cynical, but credible. You know, and you can say, if you're not naive, that people are motivated by power, and that our interpretations of the world can be self-serving. I mean, we do want to serve ourselves after all, because otherwise we die. And we are centered in one place, and so we can't see everything, and we're biased. So there is the probability that the way that we look at the world will be tainted by narrow self-interest, and maybe even tainted by in-group interests beyond narrow individual self-interest. And we know this is true, but it's also not all bad. You know, like a good person takes care of his or her family. Well, what does that mean? It means you prefer your family to outsiders. We're going to get rid of that? It's a form of prejudice. Like it really is. Like your choice of sexual partner is a form of prejudice, right? I mean, maybe it should be distributed in an egalitarian manner. Hey! That would be a lot funnier if it isn't a possibility. Like in Huxley's Brave New World, that was the rule. You shared yourself with whoever asked, because it was rude not to. And you know what? It is actually rude not to. It's seriously rude. Now, is that something you want to take away from people? You want that to be distributed in an egalitarian fashion? How prejudiced are you when you choose someone to sleep with? You choose that person and not everyone else. It's the ultimate in prejudice. If you say, well, that's not prejudicial. Oh, yes, it is. You usually go for the most attractive partner you can find. You usually go for the healthiest partner. You go for the best person you can find who can tolerate you. It's prejudicial in every possible way. So you're self-serving, and you construct a view of the world that serves those self-serving causes, and some of that has to do with power. Fair enough. That doesn't mean it all has to do with power, though. It means that some of it has to do with power. It's like racism. People are kind of racist. Or maybe people prefer their in-group. It's not that easy. Or maybe people prefer the familiar to the novel. You know, that IAT that the social psychologists have come up with, implicit association test, that measures unconscious bias. We don't know what the hell that measures. The people who invented that bloody thing, they know we don't know what it measures. They know it's not reliable. They know it's not valid enough to be used as an individual diagnostic instrument. That's technically the case. They also know that you can't train people out of their unconscious biases, because there is not much difference between unconscious bias and instantaneous perception. But they don't really care. I've written to Mazrin Banerjee, who's one of the inventors of the IAT, several times saying, how about you come out in public and say what you already know, which is that people are misusing your damn test. Silence. Well, that's partly because her discipline, social psychology, is a corrupt discipline, as the social psychologists have discovered over the last 4 years and been turning themselves inside out trying to rectify, which they haven't. Anyways, we're giving the devil his due. There's an infinite number of interpretations of the world, and it's highly probable that you'll lay a self-serving one on top of it. Yes, and also that it'll serve the interests of your group, however you define that. Yes, but it only accounts for a fraction of your behavior. There's all sorts of other things at work as well. And you don't get to reduce all human motivations to one motivation, power. And then you might also ask, well, why would you want to reduce all human motivations to power? It's so you can use power. That's why. You can justify the use of power. That's force. You don't have to engage in civilized debate. You don't have to give a damn about the facts, especially if you're not a postmodernist, because you don't believe in facts anyways. And you might ask, well, why don't you? Hey, I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. Postmodernists don't believe in facts. They believe that the idea of fact is part of the power game that's played by the white-dominated male patriarchy to impose the tyrannical structure of the patriarchy on the oppressors. It's like, I'm not making this stuff up. It's embedded right in the theory. All you have to do is read it, and you find this out. So they don't believe in facts. Well, facts would constrain the use of power. At least that's how it looks to me. Okay, so fine, we gave the devil his due. There's an infinite number of interpretations. And you're likely to use biased compression algorithms on the world, and they're likely to be biased in your favor. True. But only partly true. And the difference between an ideologue and a thinker is that a thinker knows the difference between things that are only partly true and things that are completely true. Things are complicated. Like, I like to think everything is as complicated as a military helicopter. You have to, like, I think it's 8 hours of maintenance to keep those things in the air for 1 hour, because they don't fly. They're rocks. They plummet. It's really hard to keep them in the air. And they're full of parts. And if you don't know all those parts, you don't go in there and monkey about with them, because you just wreck it. And that's just a helicopter. Like, everything is way more complicated than a helicopter. So you don't just go muck about in there hoping you're going to make it better. That isn't how it works. You need to be competent. All right, so look. Here's where the postmodernists are wrong. I think there's 3 places. And there's serious errors. The first is that there is an infinite number of interpretations, but there is not an infinite number of viable interpretations. There's a very finite number of viable interpretations. And I don't think that this is theory. I think that game theorists have already demonstrated this to some degree. And it's going to be built into AI systems very rapidly. Okay, so what are the constraints? Okay, first of all, you can't have an interpretation that leads immediately to your death or you're dead. Now, if you want to be dead, that's fine. But if you don't want to be, then you've got a lot of limited options, right? You don't get to run naked across an 8-lane freeway at night blindfolded, because probably you'll be dead. That's a bad interpretation. Okay, so you might say, because you're fragile and vulnerable and mortal, that there's a limited number of ways that you can look at the world that don't result in, let's say, death or serious damage or agony. That's a bad thing. Agony is a bad thing. Most people agree on that. So you're constrained by pain and anxiety. At least your interpretations are constrained by pain and anxiety. And you know, you can make pain worse or better by thinking about it to some degree, but only to some degree. When push comes to shove, pain is your master. Okay, so that's a big constraint. That's a big constraint. Well, but the constraints are worse than that, because not only do you not get to have an interpretation of the world that produces anxiety and suffering right now, but you don't get to have an interpretation of the world that, if you iterate it across time, produces pain and suffering. And so that's a big problem, because there's lots of, you could go out tonight and get yourself blind drunk on cocaine and sleep with 6 hookers. And you know, maybe that'd be a good night, you know. You might not think about it being so good tomorrow, but then maybe you're dead of AIDS in a year. Or maybe you're addicted to cocaine, or maybe you're a street alcoholic, or whatever. It's like, as an iterable game, that's downhill. And the thing is, you play iterated games. You don't play one, you play iterated games. And so your interpretation of the world has to be one that will sustain multiple iterations across time. Because you have to worry about 40-year-old you and 60-year-old you. And that's a big problem. That's a lot of yous stretched over a long period of time. And it's worse than that, because it's not just you. It's like you and your family, right? And not only do you have to take care of yourself now in a manner that allows you to take care of yourself when you're 40, you have to take care of yourself now in a manner that takes care of you when you're 40, so that other people are happy to have you around now and continually, so that they'll cooperate and compete with you in a positive way. And so that's getting ridiculously complicated. It's not just you now and you in the future. It's you surrounded by other people doing the same thing now and in the future. And there's a lot of other people. It can't even just be you and your family. You know, like the psychopathic burglar mob. That's just not going to go so well, right? Other people are going to object, and the world's going to object. And so fine, there's an infinite number of interpretations. That doesn't mean there's an infinite number of viable interpretations. In fact, there are hardly any. There are hardly any playable games. Now, Jean Piaget, the developmental psychologist, who's a very smart guy, he pointed out something very interesting. He said, imagine you ran a set of iterated games as a competition. And in one iterated game, the rule was, you bloody well do what I tell you to. And the other one is, well, we'll all get together and decide how we're going to do this. Okay, now we run the competition. Now, Piaget's claim is, you do what I tell you fails. And the reason for that is I have to impose force in order to keep you cooperating. And the imposition of force is a cost, it's an efficiency cost. And across time, that efficiency cost is going to multiply, and the equilibrated state solution, which is the one where we all agree, it wins. Now that's worth thinking about. You think about that locally. So you're trying to organize your family. You have a little family conference about who's doing what in the household. And if you want peace and harmony and an iterated game, you get everybody to say, well, here's the tasks, and they have to be done. People have to agree on that. And then you say, well, which task would you do? You have to do some. How about you? And, which task would you do? And everybody agrees. And then you say, well, unless you can come up with a better solution, that's the one we're going to go with. And then people can be a little resentful and angry about the conditions of existence where they have to work, but they can't really blame that on anyone else. And maybe that's the best solution you can come up with. And that was Piaget's idea of the equilibrated state. It was like, it's a voluntary agreement that can be iterated across time that works at multiple levels of social organization. Man, that's a serious, serious, serious set of constraints. And Piaget, by the way, was looking for a way to reconcile science and religion. He was looking for a biological origin to morality. And he thought he found it in the idea of the equilibrated state. And it's even deeper than that. So imagine this equilibrated state idea is actually, there's something to it. That if you set the state up properly, it will iterate across time so long that it becomes a permanent part of the environment. A hierarchy is that's exactly what a hierarchy is. Hierarchies are 350 million years old. They're not the patriarchal invention of white European Christian males in the last 300 years. They're 350 million years old. They're stable solutions to this iterated game problem. And they've been around so long that we're actually adapted to them. And that's part of the reason we have archetypal representations of the social structure. And we also have archetypal representations of the relationship of the individual to the social structure. Your job as an individual in relationship to the social structure is to embody the social structure, but also to serve as its eyes and its mouth, so that it can update itself when necessary. So you take on the mantle of your father, let's say, but he's dead. He's the past. He can't see. You can see. So you take the structure that's already there and you modify it where it's necessary. And that modification process is necessary, or the state becomes too static and collapses. And that's why the state has to be subordinate to the individual. And that's what Western culture has discovered. And we can't just let it go. That's the idea of the logos. That's a big idea. And you want to live somewhere where the individual is subordinate to the state. It's like, hey, go right ahead. There's lots of places like that, man. Emigrate. Go there. 90% of the world's countries are like that. If you want to live like that, man, go find out what it's like. You don't see immigration going there, that's for sure.